I knew the market had crashed, and I was like, why would a market crash? It's just people trading stuff. It didn't make sense to third grade Vinny. But the purpose of business was this blanket maximize profits at any cost. I couldn't reconcile those with the vision of small local business that I saw. And so I started researching that, and that's really where I just started asking more and core questions like, well, why do companies have to do that? Like, if you look, Adam Smith was a philosopher. He invented economics. He was not an economist, he was a philosopher. But I realize now you could structurally build a company and ingrain in that company that you're going to abide by these tenets. Jack Welch wanted to build the most valuable company on the planet. The GE doesn't exist as an independent company anymore. We need a Jack Welch of the B Corp model. How do we train people to do this?
Welcome to the E-Revolution. Hello everybody, welcome to E-Revolutionary, the podcast. My name is Tony Salvaggio, and today we have an awesome guest with us. This podcast, just like any other podcast that we produce, is made with refurbished technology. Sustainability at its core, and sustainability is embedded in the topic that we're going to be discussing today with the great Vinny Tafuro. So there's a shift happening right now. Technology is evolving so fast. Leadership is also evolving fast. Human capital is being redefined. And right now, Vinny Tafuro comes to talk about that shift. His work challenges the traditional models of leadership. And at a time where many organizations are struggling to align purpose with performance, Vinny is showing what it looks like to lead with both. Vinny, thank you so much for being here.
Tony, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I'm excited about the podcast. Been listening to a couple of the episodes already. It's great conversations, and I'm honored to be here. And it's been great to be your friend for so long as well.
Vinny, I think you were one of the first people that I got the pleasure to really diving deep into this evolution of capitalism. I think you were one of the first people that introduced me to conscious capitalism. You were one of the first people that I started talking about B Corps and social enterprise models. So I appreciate you for that.
Thank you.
I appreciate the conversations that we've had. And I'd like to start with anchoring and framing that mindset.
Okay.
What were those things that happened in your life? What were those moments that shaped your outlook of the world and made you say, we need something different?
Yeah. You know, I would say I'm going to go back to childhood with this one. An not often told story. I was like, I think in third grade when the 1989 stock market crash happened. And my father had like traded stocks and penny stocks and stuff when I was a kid. He always talked about the markets and this and that. So I was like, I knew the market had crashed. And I was like, why would a market crash? It's just people trading stuff. It didn't make sense to third grade Vinny, and it still doesn't make sense today sometimes. But that kind of just was buried for a long, long time. And I mean, 2 or 3 different career shifts between programming and internet and a lot of technology stuff. It was around 2011, 12 that I started really questioning what the goals were of business and why. Because it wasn't clear. Like, I knew I started a business, and like we start businesses because we have passions for something usually. But the purpose of business was this blanket maximize profits at any cost. And like, I couldn't reconcile those with the vision of small local business that I saw compared to, but when you look at big business, it kind of looked like that. And so I started researching that, and that's really where I just started asking more and core questions like, well, why do companies have to do that? Well, they don't, but they start doing that once the founder leaves is often. And that's, the first book I wrote, Corporate Empathy, was one of the examples was Walmart. And when Walmart went public in the late 80s, early 90s, whenever they went public, they had one of the better employment compensation packages because Sam Walton, the founder, realized that was their lifeblood, was making sure their teams were engaged. But then, if you started in the 90s and early aughts, and even in the 80s a little bit, you started with companies that would start using employees to balance the books. And so we started learning, if you lay people off, the numbers are higher. If you bring people, so we started using those employee benefits and salaries and whatnot and started squeezing them. So I started seeing that.
How did you get more involved in those subjects? Because when you were a kid, obviously you get the influence of what's being talked about at home, or those little bits of wisdom that your dad might give you, but at some point you started taking it more seriously.
Yeah. It was really in looking, because I spent a number of years involved with the American Advertising Federation. And while I wasn't in an advertising agency, I did digital programming and website design and marketing and whatnot. But it really, in engaging with that organization, I got to see how much social media was able to do with data well before it was Cambridge Analytica and common conversation. Like, this was 2008, 9. I understood what a tracking pixel was long before the general population did.
Interesting.
And so I realized, well, if advertisers have all this data and people don't make rational decisions, they make emotional decisions. But economics says everybody makes rational decisions all the time because they have all the information about every purchase. I'm like, those again don't reconcile. And so that's really where I started digging deeper, because at that point, I was in my early 30s, early mid 30s, and that's where the inspiration to write a book came out. And really, when I said I was going to write a book, I had no idea what the title would be. Didn't really know what the subject would be. It was kind of this dark book at once, about the loss of American dreams and cars and whatnot. So I would say 75% of that book was stuff I didn't know the day I decided I was going to write it. But 9 months later, I had 2011 was just the amount of books and web videos and content that I consumed on economics is kind of shocking.
Interesting.
I say that writing a book is the research to write a book is what killed my web design business at that point in my life, because that's when I was like, well, I think we're done with this part of the career. So,
do you consider yourself more of an economist or a philosopher or market?
I would say my profile says polymath, which I've kind of grown a little bit like an endearment to, because not a lot of people use the term. I've heard it, I hear it sometimes, but really it's this idea of multiple interests. And so my graduate degree is in foresight, and futurist and foresight feels comfortable. I think economics is this pigeonholed idea. Like, if you look, Adam Smith was a philosopher. He invented economics. He was not an economist. He was a philosopher. Same thing. Keynes would consider himself more of a philosopher. It's not till you get to post-World War II that economist is this self-built title that has this weight with it. Before that, you were philosophy. It was a philosophy. And so I would lean more towards philosophy, but in the old sense of observing different things that are disparate and being able to put ideas together. I mean, that's the definition that Adam Smith used in the beginning of World and Nations, was the idea of philosophy of looking at things and putting them together. So I would say that's probably where I lean. It's not often the title that I lead with, and depending on what's out there.
For sure.
Written.
For sure.
But yeah.
One of the things that catches my attention in how you look at the world is that it's very human-centered.
Yeah.
And there's definitely an opportunity to redefine leadership. And the point that you just made about Sam Walton, I think great companies are great because the ethos of how the company was founded was probably put in there by the founder.
Yeah.
And there has to be some sustainability to it after the founder is gone.
Yep.
How have you seen the evolution of leadership today, and where do you think we're getting it wrong?
So there's a couple different breakpoints. Number one is in the company itself. When you file, your articles of incorporation to start this business that you've got this passion for. The moral company of the business is your moral compass, which is why there are small businesses that rip people off and have really bad reputations and leave the market eventually. But most companies operate with the moral of their founders, their owners, the family that runs it, and they ingrain themselves in the community. What happens though is as you go generationally or a company sells, you lose that. And so I first discovered B Corps in 2010, I think it was. And this was, I used to host a lot of couch surfers using couchsurfing.org. It's kind of like Airbnb, but it's more of a free cultural exchange. It's not. But anyway, they had posted something that they were going to look at trying to become a certified B Corp, but because they wanted to be a nonprofit, but that wasn't going to work. I don't know exactly where they landed with that. But that was the first time I heard the term B Corp, and California was an early adopter to allow the legislation. But I realize now you could structurally build a company and ingrain in that company that you're going to abide by these tenets and this willingness to be audited by a third party. And I was like, okay, well, that solves that. But the next part then is going beyond that. We can solve it for one company, but we haven't worked out how to do it for an industry. And that's kind of where my work is headed now. But I think B Corp certification, and even if everybody doesn't get certified, they are the high watermark of how a company can operate. How I think the founder of B Lab had once said, a company can chew gum and we can chew gum and walk at the same time. And a company can be very profitable and treat its employees well and pay them well and compensate them well. So it's getting back to that and having that legal structure to protect it. When I first got involved with conscious capitalism, I went to one of their summits, and John Mackey had famously, he included B Lab and B Corps in the book Conscious Capitalism, but it was kind of more of a little mention, but you don't really have to do that. You can do it without being a B Corp.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be, after Whole Foods was acquired kind of hostilely by Amazon, I wonder if John Mackey's opinion on B Corp certification might be different today. Because I don't think it was his grand desire to have Amazon purchase Whole Foods. And so I think the B Corp certification, if it didn't protect them, it would have at least gotten to the point of being tested in a court, because that's really, all of this stuff is great, but it's really, when does a company that's a B Corp have a hostile takeover and use the B Corp certification and their legal structure to defend against that takeover? And that's really, I think, going to be an important milestone for the B Corps.
So B Corps have historically provided that democratized framework to incorporate purpose and community and impact in your ops.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest maybe setbacks, maybe that's not the right word, but one of the biggest maybe criticisms, obstacles for adoption, is that it's very hard to identify profit. And
Yeah.
it's very hard to link it to tangible short-term benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the work that is being done again because somebody in the leadership role of the company, the founder, believes that it must be done this way.
Yeah.
And they're willing to sort of sacrifice a part of their earnings to ensure that those tenets are being met.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's a scalable approach? Do you think that eventually, as we keep evolving as a society, that reality is going to have more weight than our current perspective of if it's hard to measure
Mm-hmm.
and quantify it, then it's probably going to not be in the top of my operational priorities?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, because I think there's it depends on your version of on what long-term versus short-term gains are. And, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, what your plan is this a legacy that you want your children to take it over and run it the same way? Like, we have businesses like that here that are fifth, sixth generation Florida companies. But also, is it, oh, I want to retire and just enjoy my life and exit? And I think the founders of B Lab, like, they sold a valuable sports athletic wear company, and One, I think was the name of it, and they watched it get taken apart.
Oh.
Their culture was taken apart, and that's where they created the B Lab certification, was to allow that to be ingrained, so that it wouldn't be easy to take apart if a company transferred ownership. I think another part of that, though, is the macro side. Is you can have a number of companies doing this and setting examples, but how do you start to set a broader cultural example that this is not only a functional way of doing business, but really the better and preferred way of doing business in a community, in a society, to keep a society functioning? Because we still want that cohesiveness, and that has to be should be a long-term goal of any business owner, that I want a business that's operating in a stable environment, and a stable environment takes a stable society. A stable society takes a stable paycheck and company and loyalty. And so there needs to be a two-way loyalty there. And so I think then how do we make a new normal out of kind of going back to these old school values that communities support businesses and those businesses support those communities?
Right. Well, that's a very good point, because I think our notion of what long-term looks like as a society is evolving fairly fast.
Yeah.
We're talking right now that we're probably going to be the first centennial generation.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, 300 years ago, your medium age of mortality was what, 50s, 60s, something like that, if you were lucky. So we couldn't, and if you take it a little bit back in time, just a couple of thousands of years ago, the concept of building for the future was really non-existent, because we couldn't think long term.
Yeah.
We were always in survival mode.
It's funny how, well, I would say we weren't always in survival mode as much as before the kind of industrial age, we were on a cyclical mode. So we knew the time was proceeding, but we didn't have contracts to hey, I promise I'm going to do this later. Like, that was the advent of writing started building those things. But we lived, and you look at indigenous populations, they live in cycles with nature.
Yeah.
This is starting to kind of trickle up again. Like, I personally, I follow moon cycles personally, and I kind of do journaling and I do meditations. And I also have really worked the last 3 years to shift my mindset from January 1st, the Gregorian calendar first of the year, being where I push, to giving myself another 6 weeks of winter, to quote a groundhog. But this idea that winter, for every other living aspect of this planet, winter is dormant. Yet because we have electricity and modern technology and these institutions, January 1st is supposed to be where you push forward and plow through. And so what I've really started doing is being a lot more tender with myself in January and going, wait a second, I'm still planting. There's a Rumi quote that the roots are riotous in the winter underneath ground. And so, there's still this energy, but then also allowing yourself to go to really come out of the holidays and, like, enjoy them, reflect on them, and still build. So I don't know if I got off tangent there a little bit, but that's part of this. We've been disconnected from it.
Yeah.
As you had said, like, we were living in survival mode.
Right.
That was really more of like, once we got into industrial cities, it was survival mode, because now you had to sell your time for money. Now, you had you had a king that was may or may, I think what was it? They created private monopolies. So you could no longer be a shoemaker. You had to like go to the one shoemaker for shoes because he had a private, deal with the king,
Right.
which capitalism got rid of. But now we've got, a other new host of
Different
challenges.
versions, right?
Yeah.
It's I don't know how to explain it, but I do feel like as a humanity, we're going through a period where there is definitely an elevation of consciousness.
Yeah.
Where we're more aware, probably because we're more connected in terms of, well, what happened in India in the 70s when TV was brought there for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're experiencing it worldwide.
Yeah.
At such a fast pace that I think more people are just collectively more aware. And because we're also in a society like ours here, I do believe that we're coming closer to universal income. And I just think we perceive the world a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And we understand that we have so much freedom and we have so much opportunity that if we are by default in an environment that we feel like it's either oppressing us or it's not letting us be who we want to be, immediately there's a rejection from people towards that. And I feel like that rejection towards that norm, order for the past maybe 100, 200 years is sort of what is pushing companies to also adopt different forms of connection with their users, with their consumers.
Yeah. Well, that, and that's, I think the work I'm doing in economics now is I look at the field kind of really has become frozen in time, that this and hasn't evolved much. And so what we're trying to do now with economics is like, how do we have it count more things and count more outcomes, count more inputs, like, and use more data? We're not really building models to let companies do new things. For an example, I'll go back to this because this was something that I thought of earlier and I wanted to bring up. The evolution of business from, a chartered monopoly that had one purpose: build a bridge, build a railroad, and that was it. The even original corporations ceased to exist when the project was done, to today where a corporation can do whatever it wants, acquire different things, and function, to now we've got B Corp status or legislation and things like that that allow you to kind of count more things. You're seeing the same thing in the nonprofit sector, where, the Rockefeller did a lot of work to make sure that nonprofits could be chartered nationally, which was a new move. That was a new legal structure that didn't exist before Rockefeller. And what's happened now we have nonprofits that are around for 100, 150 years that are never going to go away, are only spending the legally required minimum that the IRS requires them to spend out of their endowments every year. Slowly move forward 100 years, you have something like, what was the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute? Those are spend down institutes. And I don't know exactly how they're structured now after the divorce, but the way it was structured at the time when I learned about this was the spend down institute has to spend down all of their funds within 20 years of the death of the last founder. So Bill or Melinda, and like I said, I'm assuming they're doing the same thing with their individual ones now. There won't be a Bill Gates Foundation 20 years after he's dead. The idea being there will be new rich people with new problems and new ways of solving them. And I think that evolution, so if we can bring that, maybe some companies don't have to exist in perpetuity. Maybe some companies that are more infrastructure based, it is good. And having a way for that company to outlive the owners, but also maintain that philosophical community tie is important. I think we've lost a lot of that, celebrating acquisitions and mergers.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does is, I know when Tico here was purchased, We went from having a utility company that was regional and headquartered in downtown Tampa to a utility company that was now owned by a Canadian company.
Mm.
And it's like, how, no matter what their intentions are, there's no way they're ever going to be as ingrained in the community as Tico was when it was here.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, right, with the current work that you're doing, how are you seeing that evolution of companies trying to connect differently with the communities that they're in? How are you seeing these organizations taking a more active role in solving problems that in theory we've been trained that it's not a business responsibility to solve?
Yeah. I think there's so many companies doing so many different things. Like we've said a lot about B Corps and B Lab, but there's companies that are just practicing stakeholder capitalism as their own. There are also companies that are exiting different ways. There's companies that are doing a sale to their employees or to an employee trust. There's a new concept of exit to community. And so there's all these vehicles out there that have been used in little bits and pieces here and there. Publix has been an employee stock company for decades. So the model was there. It's just, how does it get adapted and used, and has it become more widely spread? And so I think that's the work we're trying to do with the Institute, is really creating an umbrella and language for all of these different ideas, whether it's B Corp, conscious capitalism, employee ownership, social, whatever it is, having language to go, oh, this is design thinking and economics. And, here's the tenets that they hit. And so it's really coming up with that vernacular and then raising awareness that economics, as it's been over the last 50 years, has a lot of flaws that the institution itself doesn't want to address, because a lot of different arguments fall apart when they do. And so it's, how do we build a better mousetrap for economics, or an economic system outside of mainstream economic thinking?
Interesting. So do you believe you can operationalize it? Because if it's treated like an algorithm,
Mhm.
and if there's a set of things that have to be done, if there's a roadmap to follow,
Yeah.
then let's assume that we get enough people to generate data to prove that there's a direct relationship with installing or enabling these different
Yeah.
things that need to happen with, look how much market share this company now has, look at their happiness index of their employees or the happiness index of their consumers. Do you think that's going to generate enough traction where it's going to become the new norm?
I believe it will. And I believe with enough people talking about it, with enough businesses setting the example, with enough transactions happening, their exits to community or employees that are different than, just a private equity fund coming in. The more those stories told, the more other entrepreneurs and business founders will want to take that path. So I think that that's a big part of it, is telling the story. And I do think a lot of companies that are doing that good work don't talk about it enough yet.
Mr.
We get
Marketer brain
what?
talking.
Yeah, well, a lot of it. No, it's the humble business owner.
For sure.
We're doing this. We're focused on this. This is the thing. We treat our workers well. But the thing is the bad influencers are talking a lot, and so the good ones need to start talking up. I think Simon Sinek recently, Jack Welch is Simon's long-term goal as a influencer, is to, and I won't even use the word, is to undo all the damage Jack Welch did with GE. And it really is this. We still have this rank and yank philosophy that fire your bottom 10%, make people compete against each other for this, and when you look at it, Jack Welch wanted to build the most valuable company on the planet. 20 years after he left, the GE doesn't exist as an independent company anymore. The light bulbs are owned in Europe. engines are made in South America. Like, there is no GE. His pursuit of being the most profitable company left them holding a big portion of the financial fallout from home equity defaults in the financial crisis, because GE learned that they could make more money financing washing machines instead of making washing machines. And yet we still celebrate Jack Welch as this amazing CEO. And I mean, it's sliding in reputation, but there is no counterbalance business owner right now. And I think that's anybody, that's looking. We need a Jack Welch of the B Corp model to be that boisterous, that loud, that out there, that forward, to be, how do we train people to do this? Because that's part of it. People went to GE to get trained on how to be an executive.
Yeah.
He took that infrastructure and turned it into this kind of yank and rank system.
Yeah.
So I think we need that advocacy from inside.
That's so true. That is, and it's one of those things where if you look at socialism from the way that the intention is built in it, it sounds like a wonderful, cause in terms of fairness and equality. And then when you put it into action, you have great successes like the Soviet Union, that at its height was something pretty remarkable. But then after the fact, you start dissecting it and you realize that, much like everything, there are some good elements to it, but operationally, the execution is different. And I think that one of the biggest things that Jack Welch was able to at least prove to the business world is this algorithmic view of how can you have a very efficient process. And from an efficiency and process perspective, I think here in America, we are incredible. But the downside of that is that when you create such an efficient machine, then the component of the human side gets relegated.
Gets pushed out.
So what are people that are listening, what can they do? How can they start becoming part of the solution, of the change, of the evolution? How can they do whatever it is that they're doing better and revolutionize their industry, their market?
I would start with, if you are a business operator, are you operating with, B Lab offers the B Corp assessment for free. And it's great. There's this idea that's measured improves. So even if you go through the assessment, I love the fact that you can go through it and they make it available for free. That you can go through and see, where does my company sit? A lot of it too, it gives you great ideas on how you can, in the nuts and bolts of whether or not you have a policy manual, how you count your carbon footprint, how you, pay people. Like, all of these things are in there so you don't have to invent it. You don't just sit there and go, hopefully it comes to you. Like, there's an assessment that's going to ask you 200 questions that you may have never thought about before. If you're not the business owner, but you're involved with businesses, what is the legacy plan for that company? Because you may love the founder and the way they treat their employees and how they treat the workers. You've got a workforce level company, but what is the founder's plan? Is the founder not thinking? They may not be aware that there's other models out there, because you look at, we're going to have this huge wealth transfer over the next years as boomers retire. A lot of them have already retired, but we still have some left that own some really successful businesses that are going to go through exits and sales. And I think we have an opportunity in that moment, because at that point, there's only so much a person retiring from a company needs to get through the next 30 years of their life, whatever it is after retirement. So there's some wiggle room there and going, okay, well, what's my legacy going to be? What am I leaving behind? And if you want that company to be left behind, now's the time as you're exiting to do that. And so that's another way is talking, because I think people don't know the options are out there.
That's such a good point. How can people learn more about all of the amazing things that you're doing? Your work, the Institute. I'd love for you to sort of, as we wrap up this episode that I feel like it could go for hours and hours, but I'm sure well, I think we got to do something like sessions or something like that, because I'd love to have you here again and drill down a little bit more into, well, how do we do it? Let's shift from the philosophical side of it, and that's the part that I'm passionate about, is the hands-on, the let's figure this out. That's sort of what has taken me down this rabbit hole for the past 12 years of building what we're building, is because we do want to figure it out.
You and me both.
I know, and that's the fun part. The fun part is rolling out your sleeves and figuring out a way to make it happen. So how can people learn more about it?
So probably the easiest way to find out more, learn more, is we've got a podcast that comes out monthly called the Design Economics Podcast. And then the Institute itself is the Institute for Economic Evolution. And so we're Evolve Economics is the domain name, .org. We're a 501c3 charitable organization. We have had that since our founding in 2021. Well, we were under fiscal sponsorship before that. But the Institute website has information on the idea of design thinking and economics. What we're doing, we've got a coalition of people and professionals that are in the nonprofit, the social sector, the business sector, and the academic sector, all kind of coming together around these ideas. The podcast, though, really gets into tangible conversations. So, last month's, I don't know when this is going to come out, but like our April episode or March episode this year was an interview with Tom Llewellyn, who is the CEO or executive director of Shareable. And Shareable puts out a whole bunch of information on building tool libraries in your community. I know you had a guest a few months ago that was talking about libraries of maker spaces and whatnot. And so, he was one of the founders. He helped found the Asheville Tool Library. Okay. And so this is a podcast that doesn't sound like it has anything to do with economics. But if tool libraries are successful, Home Depot's sales go down. And that becomes a problem. So anyway, it's a fun podcast. I've had filmmakers, had Shareable, also some economics.
Love it. Vinny, thank you so much for being here. I love what you're doing. Keep doing it. You're a friend of us, and you're always welcome to join us.
Thank you for having me, Tony. I appreciate it.
Yeah.